Thank you for listening to The Path to Authenticity. My name's Tom Gentry. I think of this show as the opposite of small talk. You'll hear real conversations with real people who know who they are. We talk about what makes them who they are, how they became who they are, and how we might become truer expressions of who we are. If this is your first time here, thanks for checking it out. If not, thanks for coming back. I'm Tom Gentry, and this is The Path to Authenticity. Episode 223. This episode features a conversation I had with a former client. Something that I'm doing a lot of these days and that I really enjoy. It's sort of an alternative to intervention, and it's short-term coaching with families, parents, spouses, to help them get help for their loved one who's suffering from addiction. So I'll start working with them, get an idea of what's going on, begin to learn some things about the person and their situation, help the family choose an appropriate facility, ideally one that I have visited, where I know the people who work there. A lot of times I'm able to do that. And I help them come up with a plan for getting them there. And then when together we devise a plan, I support them in carrying it out. And really what it amounts to is a strategy for getting the person into treatment. And they need help doing that. So it's important to me because I have a lot of friends who are interventionists who I really respect their work. And I believe in it, but I also know not every family needs to go to that extreme, but they still need a little bit of help. So this is a conversation with a guy named Bill. And his is the first family that I really worked with in this way as a private consultant coach. And I've been doing it ever since, here and there, and all the business I've had has been word of mouth that originated from this family and one other family that contacted me around the same time. And both of these original families were referred to me by the same person who was a client who I worked with almost 20 years ago now, who's doing really well. So this original family, it started with their 28-year-old son. Then mom referred her bridge partner to me, whose daughter I helped get into treatment. 6 months later, I helped her significant other get into treatment. And it's just been one after another that's come from these first two families. And it feels really good to me to be recommended by a family who really feels like I helped them. Here, we just kind of talk about the work that we did together, how it unfolded, and just how I was able to help him. So I appreciate you being here, appreciate you listening. Enjoy my conversation with Bill. if we take a little bit of time and talk about what happened and what your experience was like working with me and what happened. So we spoke for the first time, I think it was 2 years ago on Christmas Eve, if memory serves me. Is that right?
That sounds about right.
So why don't you talk about the circumstances of that phone call?
Let me go a little bit further back and sort of set the stage for you, Tommy, because, although that was the first communication that I'd had with you, it wasn't the first need for that communication with you to surface. I think I always felt like I was fairly sophisticated and in tune. I spent most of my adult career in healthcare and certainly had a very positive feeling towards mental health and substance abuse and recognizing the critical need for care of those people, and had worked actually with a drug counselor earlier in helping to understand an issue that another family member had. And then having grown up and gone to college in the early 70s, the exposure to drugs was not new to me. I certainly had been around it a lot in college, but as an adult, I lived a much more serious lifestyle and had not encountered it. And so when my son began to develop a problem, it wasn't readily apparent to me. And I think that probably is not untypical because we all have this great bias for our children.
Hmm.
And I certainly don't want to take anything away from that, but it does cloud our judgment and clouds our ability to confront sometimes some unpopular truths. But it was really my other children, that had sort of brought this to my attention and wanted me to intervene to do something, or they were going to intervene, but thought it was important for us as a family to deal with it. And at Christmas, we were actually at my sister's house for a family dinner. And my son basically had passed out at the dinner table. And that pretty much brought it to the focus for not just my immediate family, but my extended family. And we knew at that time we had to deal with it. Unfortunately, I just didn't feel well equipped for it. And I believed that I needed some help. And I got a phone call out of the blue from a friend of a friend who heard about this guy named Tom Gentry in South Florida that had been able to help another friend of ours navigate the waters of treatment for substance abuse. And that's when I called you around Christmas time, confronting the truth that I had to deal with. And I learned very early on that parents are biased, that we cannot make good judgments, good decisions for our children because we love them too much. And it's hard to know what's right. And of course, I had been schooled earlier in tough love and knew that I had to stand up and do something about it. But I really wasn't sure what to do. And I wanted to make sure that as much as my wife and I and my other children wanted to help our son, we didn't want to make the wrong decisions and make the mistakes and not help him. And we went through a period early on, as you'll remember, Tom, where he didn't necessarily embrace the idea that we knew what was best for him.
Yeah.
And it took him a while to get there. But what I found in working with you is you armed me with the best science to deal with my son, and also your experience in dealing with your own issues and your own family that helped me and my wife make some really tough decisions. And then along the way, you introduced us to some people that are really high on my list for some of the finest people I've ever met. And because people began to step up in the system to help us and to help our son and make sure that we made the right decisions. And that went on for a period, probably a couple of weeks, and at various stages of crisis. I guess it sort of culminated on a particularly bad day when you and I and others had talked to my son about participating in an outpatient program here in our hometown that was a really good program with some really fine people, but recognizing the fact that perhaps he needed residential treatment and outpatient was not going to be satisfaction. And it eventually, and you hear him tell the story now, it was always his idea for residential treatment. I hadn't debated that point with him. I was just glad that he embraced it. But the interventionist at the program here in our hometown came over at a moment of crisis and was able to get our son into a detox program that basically was 3 hours away. And he gave up his afternoon to put him in the car and drive him halfway to the facility where somebody from the facility met them and journeyed the rest of the way. And I know you had numerous conversations with them and a real robust debate over what was the right process and right place for my son to be. And I just think, quite frankly, I think that added to the good decisions that were ultimately made, that my son bought into the solution that was needed. And after his detox, I went and picked him up. But in finding the treatment program, and I guess it's okay for us to mention Voyage.
Yeah.
Voyage sent an ambassador who was at one time had been in college in our hometown, but still lived in North Carolina. And he showed up at our house one afternoon when my wife and I are having a particularly difficult time with our problems. And he was like a godsend. I mean, he was absolutely the perfect person to deliver a very important message to us. And he was the same age as our son. So it wasn't like he had a whole lot of experience, but the experience he had was well placed. And he'd actually had been at Voyage and worked with the people at Voyage and knew the program very well. So I guess it's kind of ironic, don't you think, Tom, that at the end of all this chaos in my life and our lives and the help that you gave us, my son seems to think he got there on his own, which is fine with me. I think that's great because I think that's part of how you continue to grow and improve in dealing with your addiction. You got to own it.
That's the word that came to mind for me.
Yeah. And the fact that he owns it, to me, is just tremendous progress. And he not only owns the disease, he owns the cure, he owns the treatment, he owns the whole program. And it's very evident to those of us that spend time with him now. And his pride, I think, in achieving sobriety for now well over 18 months is just an incredible journey that we've been on. And we're so grateful to you, Tom, because we would not have been there without your guidance and help and understanding, support, and also comfort. I can remember, some difficult days and times, and the phone would ring and you'd be on the other end at just the right time with just the right words, encouragement and commitment for us to see this through. And I don't recommend anybody go through this journey alone, especially when you're dealing with a loved one, because of the bias. Love will bias you terribly when dealing with somebody. And you really need that experience. You would never want to go into court as a lawyer representing yourself because you're always too close to the problem.
Right.
And that's what I think a lot of parents, and certainly in our case, we found ourselves way too close to the problem and unable to really deal with it as rationally as we would like to. And because we are adults and because we try to make good decisions and because we are educated, we felt it necessary to get a level of expertise that you were able to provide to us. It reassured us that we were making the right decisions, and your advice was timely and constant throughout this whole process. And when I picked up my son from the detox facility, we flew to West Palm Beach and met you at a restaurant in West Palm Beach. And you actually drove him and me to the facility on the Hobe Sound in Florida. And it was a very quick visit. I met some of the staff, toured the facility very quickly. And then you were kind enough to give me a ride back to the airport. And I will just say that people at Voyage could not have been better. It was just an outstanding facility. It was just perfect. And we're just really proud of him that he was able to have that opportunity to participate in that program and then did so well in it. He still keeps up with everybody. He participates in the alumni calls. He does the work you have to do constantly to be successful.
He's happy too, right? Absolutely.
I hope no one has to go through it. But having gone through it, I will just tell you, I don't think we could have had a better outcome. And let me knock on some wood here because it's not over. It's always constant. But it has been a very rewarding to us. And we did the parent program at Voyage for a week, which was very helpful to us to be participating with the team down there and our son and to understand the process we went through and meeting other parents that were in the same situations that we were was very helpful to us. So the program at Voyage is top notch. Haven't seen a lot of those programs. I don't care to see a lot of them, but I can't imagine the one would be much better than what we saw at Voyage. And we wouldn't have gotten there, Tom, without your knowledge of the field and knowing people that are in this line of work and who's good and who's not so good and where you need to be. And quite frankly, some of us were a little apprehension about sending somebody with an alcohol and drug problem to South Florida. And I think we had to overcome that bias because what I've learned over the last year and a half is there's a sober community in that area that is very supportive of each other and really helps people in need get through those programs and to live successful lives. And what it also shows is that you can be down. You can have dug that deep hole for yourself, and there's still a bright future for you because there's so many people down there that have been there and now have been sober for 10, 15, 20 years and have lived productive and quality lives in their community down there. I can remember being in a restaurant during Parents Week at Voyage, and the guy that owns the restaurant, which was crowded and a very successful place in Jupiter, just came by and said that he had been sober for 23 years. It was just amazing to see the people that have conquered their problems and overcome these difficulties and to see the success they were having with their lives. So I would say this, that we wouldn't have gotten there. We wouldn't have been where we are today had we not stumbled onto Tom Gentry. And it was really just happenstance that we were able to get your name. And then I looked you up on the internet and you looked like you were okay. But after a couple conversations, I knew that we had the right person. And you came highly recommended by the friend of a friend that you had helped previously. And that young man is a very successful attorney in this area and has really gone on to distinguish himself. And I knew that if you could help him, you could help us too. And so it's been challenging, but it's also been comforting to know there are so many people out there who want to help us and want to help our son. And it's one reason that I'm doing this podcast is because I feel like people who've had this experience, universally want to help others find a way forward. And so this is my moment, as small as it is, of hopefully making some contribution.
From my point of view, I got this phone call and you were very distraught. I mean, it was definitely a difficult day. And one of the things you didn't mention is that your son was living in your home at the time, which when that's going on, when someone is in active addiction in your home, in a sense, they're kind of holding you hostage. It's a pretty hard thing to unravel. And so I could tell you were in a lot of pain. And what I tried to do was get a sense of, obviously he needed treatment and he needed it quickly. That seemed apparent. But to get an idea of who he was, what he loves, what gets him going in life, and get an idea of where he might do well. And we talked about 3 different facilities. And I had a couple conversations with him in the middle of the process. And at one point thought I had him convinced. And then ultimately he wanted to try the intensive outpatient program, which was clinically appropriate because he had never had treatment before. So he deserved that opportunity to do it on an outpatient level. And although I had a pretty good idea that it wasn't going to work, and it didn't, and we had a plan in our back pockets of Voyage, partially because they get guys outside doing stuff, fishing, and your son, that's part of what he loves to do. But also the owner, the director, I have deep ties. I've known these guys for more than 10 years, one of them 20, I trust them. That's the thing. Like I knew that if I sent someone's son to them, that they'd be taken care of. And when I try to do this with families, I always want to send the person to a place where I'm pretty confident that if something goes wrong, I can make a phone call and somebody will pick up the phone on the other end, even if it's like a Friday night or whatever, because this is a difficult time for families. So I knew he'd be looked after. I knew that I would have a voice to the extent that I needed it. And I knew that they had a really good family program and that you guys could benefit from that. And just the process that we went through, I essentially was a consultant to you and feel like, I could have sent you to an interventionist, which could have gotten it done, but you'd spent a lot more money and it might not have gone any better and it might not happen any more quickly. And I feel like I was able to provide you the emotional support you needed while we talked through this and worked it out together, how we were going to make this happen from the first conversation to the admission.
Tom, you're right. You were very much a consultant to us through this process, but at the same time, we were united in our goal, which was to help our son. Mm-hmm. And that was always our focus, and that was always your focus. And what you helped us do is help us understand how we could best do that. Mm-hmm. We wouldn't have gotten there on our own, I don't think. We may have gotten there, but it would have been very fortunate, very lucky, and we would have probably made a lot of mistakes along the way. But because we had your guidance and your experience, it just made a huge difference. And it gave me at least the satisfaction or the confidence that I was doing my best to help him. Mm-hmm. Because I recognized the shortcomings in my experience in education and background, and I went out and found the person who could make up the difference and help us get through this. And that's really how I saw you through this process. And then ultimately, I ended up having a really good friend. And my wife and I, to this day, think of Tom Gentry as one of our very best friends because he was there for us when we needed a really good friend to help us. And what really endeared you to all of us, Tom, is the fact that you put our son first. And I don't know about other parents, but anybody who help their children and put their children on the right course has a special place in every parent's heart.
Yeah. Well, it's, like you mentioned, it was very much a mutual process because one of the things that struck me about you immediately is you were really clear about, I need help. I can't do this. And having been on this end of the phone many, many times over the years, it doesn't always happen that way. A mom or a dad, they might take or heed advice for a day or two and then disappear. It's not everyone's as consistent and decisive about putting it to some degree in someone else's hands the way that you did and entrusting me and my point of view with this. I mean, you listened to what I write. I mean, there are probably a couple times when you might have talked to him sooner than I would have liked you to or whatever, but we figured it out and you heard me. And I think one of the things that families need to understand is if you're going to pay someone to help you, let them help you. And it's the same with these treatment facilities. If you're going to send a family member to a medical facility, what good is it going to do if you don't expect them to complete treatment, follow the staff's advice, follow the aftercare plan? I mean, if you're not going to do it and stick with it. And I think one of the really good things about you handling it the way that you did is that you talked about how parents just aren't in the right place to be able to have a clear head about these things. And the way I see it is that as parents, we want to believe in our kids. We don't want to see them as someone who has a problem like this. And when they tell us they can stop, they've got it, we want to believe them. It's just almost never true when they'll tell you, I got this under control, I don't need help. It's just almost never true. And I see a lot of times, instead of approaching the problem head on the way that you did, families might go through this, might fight their way through this for 3 or 4 treatment episodes over the course of a few years before they call someone like me to help them. And I feel like by that time, it's made it harder for everyone.
I don't want your listeners to think that this was an easy process because there are a lot of discussions along the way. Outpatient versus inpatient, 30 days versus 60 days. I mean, there were some finer points that needed to be worked out. And that's pretty much how you have to design the program, I've learned, in accordance to the person in need. In our son's case, it was clearly residential treatment was needed, and clearly 30 days was not going to be enough. And what Voyage made me a believer in is that you've got to go the longer period of time in order to have the most likelihood of success. And a 60-day program is twice as good as a 30-day program. And the opportunity for success after 60 days is higher than just after 30 days. That's something I learned through this process that I had no idea. I'd seen the Sandra Bullock movie, 28 Days, and I thought everybody went for 28 days, and that was it. And then I learned 28 days doesn't make it for most people. You need that time in a succession. You don't need to keep coming back every year for 28 days.
One of the things that has been established clearly with data is that the longer a person is exposed to some type of treatment, the longer the duration, the more likely they are to remain abstinent over time. So the longer the treatment, the better. Almost always. It's never like, oh, well, we don't want to give them too much. It just doesn't work that way. It just doesn't.
Another discussion point we had among ourselves, and including our son in that discussion, was, okay, you've done your 60 days at Voyage. What do you do next? And the importance of that discharge period where you live in sober living community is really important.
A lot of times what I'll tell families, I'll generally say, I'm telling you this, and you're probably not going to want to hear it, and you probably don't want to tell your son or daughter this, but what you should expect is to let them go for a year. Let them go through a year of all the milestones that come up in a year, and to get through that sober. It just takes time. It takes time and dedication and commitment to really get over some humps in life and to do it without having used. And it's a lot easier for someone to do that in a protected environment where they know they're not going to get away with getting high than it is if they're out on their own. It just is.
And Tom, that's not unlike a physical illness. I have a family member that had a very serious physical issue and some serious surgery. And she was told that it would take 12 months for her to recover from the surgery. And so it's not unexpected that it should take longer than 28 or 60 days
to
recover from an addiction.
Well, Bill, listen, I've always felt like I think it's a privilege to do this kind of work, to be at a place in someone's life when they have an opportunity. First of all, they're a lot of times at their worst, and they're at a place where they can have monumental change take place and miracles happen, and to get to be there and witness it and be a part of it. But also, I hope this came across from the first conversation with me that I don't take for granted the weight of the responsibility, and that it's an honor to have someone like you entrust someone like me with their son and I take it seriously, and I appreciate the opportunity to work with you and your family. And I'm really glad that this is one of the success stories, that here a couple of years have gone by. We've met for lunch, and it's been really nice. It's been really nice to become friends. And I got to watch your son celebrate his first anniversary and be there to witness that and to see how well he's doing in recovery. And it's a gift. It's all a gift. It really is.
Tom, you're far too kind to us, because it was you that came into our lives and made such a big difference and helped us when we were really very vulnerable. And I don't think my wife and I, at any time doubted your sincerity and your dedication and commitment to help us get through this. And I think it made a big difference. It made it a lot easier to trust you and your recommendations, which all turned out to be great. And then the people you introduced us to all turned out to be just such a very high caliber of people that it was very comforting knowing that we had you there with us. And I'll just tell you that I can't imagine going through this as a parent without having somebody like a Tom Gentry helping you make these very difficult decisions, because they are not easy. And the fact that somebody you love just makes it incredibly complicated and complex to come up with the right answer.
Well, thank you, Bill. I appreciate you taking the time to do this.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the show. Please subscribe, leave a rating or a review at Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen. You can learn more about my other podcasts by visiting thepathtooauthenticity.com or by clicking the link in the show notes. Music is by the band Punk Rock Opera, used under a Creative Commons license and with permission from the artist. The show is produced by me, Tom Gentry. You can find more of my work on Substack, including a podcast only available to paid subscribers. So again, thanks for listening. Keep coming back. Be nice.
great, honey.